and thanks everyone else for coming today. I'm excited to walk you all through some of the new features that are in V8. Before I begin, though, I do want to take a minute to acknowledge the hard work of Lauren Davidson, who's on the cast iron team, and also Alexa Gray, who I don't think is on this call. Lauren, in particular, did a considerable amount of work on Manifold. This was maybe the first version where I think I didn't write, I don't know if I wrote a line of code for this version of Manifold. Maybe a bit here and there, but it was the rest of the cast iron team who did most of the work, and Lauren really did a ton, especially around the authoring feature. So big thanks to Lauren. And Lauren, if I misrepresent any of your work today, feel free to interrupt me and jump in. Okay, so we'll see how long this takes. I have a rough outline and a lot to cover, so let's dive in. Share my screen. Let's see. Okay. So for today, I'm going to do this demo on the Edge instance of Manifold that we maintain. There are a couple commits, I think, on this version that aren't visible or that we haven't deployed to other versions. So we may see a few things a little different, but for the most part, it should be the same as what you're running if you're running V8. I'll just kind of refer to the Manifold documentation before starting. It's a little bit buried, but there is a page on here in the docs under Administering Manifold Release Notes V8, where we wrote up the kind of overview of what features are in V8. And I'll encourage you to refer back to this if you want to read a little bit more. Essentially, what I'll be showing you today are the features that are listed here. Okay, let's dive in. So we'll talk about authoring first, since that's the kind of big central feature to V8. And I have a demo project set up, and I don't have any text in it yet. So I'm going to start by ingesting a text. So I have this standard ebook edition of Ray Bradbury's short fiction that we can use as an example. And bear with me while this ingest runs. It'll only take a second or two. What I want to show you is browsing on. I want to show you how you can use authoring functionality in Manifold V8 to both create a text from scratch and to make edits to an existing text. And so we'll start with this existing text. So it's been ingested. Let's go into it. Let's look at it to see what it looks like. Okay, so this is a pretty straightforward EPUB. It has a number of kind of short stories in it that are pretty brief. And then there's a couple longer ones, which are still one long section in the EPUB. And then there are some anchor links within it for navigation that essentially jumps us down to a particular part of this section. So we'll use this as an example to look at how you might make changes to it in V8. Okay, so let's jump back to the back end. And so we're looking at this text right now. The first thing I want to look at are the sections. So this is new in V8. And here we see each of the text sections that make up this text. And these correspond, if you're familiar with how EPUBs work, these correspond closely to each of the HTML documents that would have been in the EPUB that Manifold ingested. Each of these sections, and Manifold's always had this model, it just hasn't really been exposed as something that's editable. Each of these sections is its own record and has a few properties exposed on it, not very many right now. Just the slug, which is what shows up in the URL, and a toggle, that lets us hide it in the navigation. Um, we can determine now which of these sections is the start section. So Manifold figured out that this story is a starting section based on the EPUB. But if we wanted readers to, start on the title page, we could set that to the start section instead. Um, this is new. You couldn't really easily change this prior to V8. We can also remove sections. I'm not going to, and we can kind of reorder sections here as well. The order of the sections is important because there's two ways to navigate through a book. There's kind of a linear way where you just proceed from one section to another as you turn the pages or advance through the sections. And then the other way we can navigate through the book is through the table of contents, which is here. So there's a little bit of abstraction to kind of wrap your head around between the sections in the EPUB or in the manifold text and the table of contents, which is usually in the same order, but in some cases has more detail. And so here is where we see, for example, these anchor links to the different parts of the Creature That Time Forgot story that we were looking at on the front end. This whole table of content structure can now be managed in the back end and changed. So as with the sections, you can change the order of things here. You can nest things if you want to. There's different ways you can organize this. You can also remove things from the table of contents. You can edit an entry. And so here we're saying, what is the label of the entry in the table of contents? Which section does it point to? And then optionally, is there an anchor link? And we'll see those down here, that goes to a particular link within that section. You can have Manifold generate the TOC. I'm not going to do it here, but this is useful when you're kind of composing a text and the order of the sections is very similar to what you want the table of contents to be. So Manifold can just generate the table of contents in the same order that they show up in the section. So that can be a good starting point. I think if I were like building out a text in Manifold, I would start by getting my sections in order. Then I would generate a table of contents, and then I might add more or add nesting or build out the table of contents. There is some potential for sections and contents to get out of sync. So there's some manual management required here. This may be something Substraction may be something we'll want to revisit in the future, depending on what kind of feedback we get from users and how people do with it. Okay, so that gives us a way to kind of structure the text itself. We also have a new kind of subview here called assets. And this is a little technical, but here we see we're exposing all of the assets that Manifold extracts and stores as part of the ingestion process. And mostly you don't need these or probably don't need to care about them too much. But in some cases, a text could have an image or, I don't know, a video or some asset that you want to link to from within the text. So it's important that you have a place to kind of grab the URL so that you can create a reference to it from the text. These have always been a part of Manifold. Like Manifold's always stored the file assets that it collects when it ingests any kind of text. Now we're just exposing them, whereas they were not exposed previously. Okay, I'll go back to the sections and we'll look at editing. So let's just go with like a smaller one here, pendulum. So clicking that pencil opens the Manifold editor. And this is by far where the most work occurred in V8, was trying to build this editor. And I think what we have now is a great functional starting point. It's pretty robust. You can make a lot of changes, but this is really complicated because we're trying to support the whole world of what can be in a Word doc or a Google doc or an EPUB. And it's basically like the whole world of HTML, which is a lot. And so it's great in the case of this text, which is really quite simple. But you may see places in here where there's some HTML that we can't edit in the rich text editor. And so you'll see a block around it telling you that in order to change this, you have to go into the HTML editor. So, this may get kind of technical at some times. But generally speaking, you can just go ahead and make changes in here. So, I can add another sentence here. We'll just make this bold so we can see what it looks like. And then let's go back. What story? This is the pendulum. So we'll look at this in the front end and reload. You can see the text that I added now shows up in the reader. So certainly, like for making small changes, it's straightforward. You could also, we tried to build this so it's fairly powerful. So for example, like I can click this little icon here and see the HTML structure of this. It's also possible to, like select one of these tags and add a class to it to reference a style that's defined in your style sheet. There's tools in here for kind of changing the block level wrapper, and also for, adding or managing paragraphs and headings and whatnot, as well as like basic formatting stuff, and then the ability to add images and iframes and whatnot. There will be some stuff, like I said, that you can't really do in here, especially more complicated documents. And so we have the HTML editor where you can go in and actually change the HTML. There's also a little helper in here that lets you see kind of the style sheets that are applied to this text. If you want to reference specific styles in here, you can. So this is the, oh, and you can also change the name of the section, which wasn't possible before. So this is kind of the authoring interface. I mean, here you can see how, like if I publish this text in Manifold and I have to make some small correction or make a little amendment or something, it's pretty simple to do that now, whereas before you would have to re-ingest the whole text. Just getting this editing in place required a lot of work that, maybe isn't obvious. Like, one of the things that made Manifold simpler in the past was that the only way to edit the content was through ingestion. So the text didn't change that much. Now that they can change a lot, it meant we had to kind of rethink how annotations, for example, are mapped to the text. Completely rewrote the service that exists to place or to figure out where annotations go when the text changes. We had a kind of naive service for that. It's much more robust now. It also meant that we had to add, I won't demo this, but we had to add some views in here where users could see their annotations that they might have made on a text that no longer show up in the text because the passage that they annotated changed too much for Manifold to place the annotation or was removed altogether. So there's new views in here that let users see their annotations that don't really belong anywhere at this point, which is important because we don't want users to lose, content that they spent time writing. Okay, let me get out of here and we'll go back. Let's look at let's make a new text. So the other piece of this is that we can now make text in Manifold without starting from an ingestion. So I can just make Zach text, a new text, and let's see, we'll make student paper 1, student paper 2, just kind of scaffold this with a couple sections. And let's give it an image so it looks decent. Save it. Another thing you'll see, and like we don't get any gold stars for this because we should have done it a while ago, but there's now consistent alt text fields for every image in Manifold that weren't there before. We kind of went through and audited all of those. Okay, going back to the text sections. So here's my sections that I scaffolded. I'll go ahead and generate a table of contents based on those sections. So Manifold can do that quickly. And then let's just take a look at this and see what we have. So if we look at this in the reader, we have a really boring text with nothing in it. So just the two sections I made, and they're both blank. So let's go ahead and do some things here. So in V8, you can ingest content at the text level like you always could. You also can ingest content at the section level. So I'll go ahead and let's see. I have a Google Doc here that my darling daughter wrote in college recently. I'm sure she won't mind if we use it. Copy the link. We'll ingest it. Cross our fingers. Okay, so Manifold has ingested this, and we can look at this. Let's go to the first one. Okay, here's Georgia's paper that she wrote from Google Doc. Now, let's say we need to change this. So maybe the students start, maybe you have students who are composing a text in class and they start by ingesting from Google Docs. One thing to note is just how kind of gnarly this HTML is. Don't blame Manifold for this. Blame Google and the way that Google transforms a Google Doc to HTML. When Google does that, it injects a ton of inline styles that Manifold then has to pull out, which is why you get kind of a convoluted and complex style sheet, and also like some kind of weird markup with all these span tags that you don't really want in here. One piece of advice, if you're going to go from a Google Doc to Manifold and you want to like manage that content easily in Manifold, you might try instead downloading it as a Word doc, because I think Google has invested more time in their Google Doc to Word conversion than they have in their Google Doc to HTML conversion. So if we then re-ingest this from, this is the right one, from a Google Doc version, one thing you'll see, so one annoying thing that we should fix is that it doesn't get the title right. It's been an issue we need to address. But we save this and then look at the HTML. See, you actually get much better markup. It's much cleaner. There's not all these inline styles that are unnecessary. And now you just have something that's a little bit easier to, work with in this editor if you want to make some changes and maybe clean it up and, fix up like the way our citations look. Or if you're like, Minnesota and you have some kind of built-in style sheets that you apply to all text, we could apply one of those styles to this in here, save it, get this in the reader, and start to see those changes show up. So kind of neat, I think. And then of course we can go back and, potentially ingest another document for the second section, and you start to see how you can, compose a text using different sources or authoring it in Manifold itself. Lots of options for how you put something like this together, especially in the classroom and working with students. So here's her second paper. So that's kind of neat. Some other small features in here. You have a light mode if you like it a little bit lighter. You can kind of move things around. I guess we looked at that. So yeah, this is the editing piece. One other thing to add here. The other kind of new piece for this is MathML support. So let's do this. We'll make a new section, and I have some MathML, another document. Which I'll save. Okay, so MathML is complicated, this kind of, math markup. So we don't support editing it in the rich text editor. So this is another good example of the kind of HTML content that we can show in the rich text editor, but we're not going to let you edit. And then if we look at this on the front end, Let's see, I have to add this to the table of contents. We'll reload the front end and see what this looks like in the reader. So yeah, here's support for math. The other cool thing is you can actually annotate this, I think. Yeah, look at that. So I can um, exceptional formula. Um, so that's kind of neat, I think. And yeah, we haven't we've done some tests of this. I don't know that anyone's published a book with a bunch of math using V8. I doubt it. So there may be some kind of rough edges to work out here, but really curious to hear what people's experience is with the math stuff. All right, let me go to back to my outline here and see what else we have. All right. Okay, so moving away from authoring, let's talk about some changes to the back end generally. So one thing you'll notice is we've added drop downs, or one drop down at least, to the primary navigation here to let you choose between all projects or project collections. We've kind of reworked the breadcrumbs so that you can better see the hierarchy. Just Manifold starts to get a little confusing when when you have like projects with text and you need to know which text and which project you're in. So hopefully this clarifies that a little bit. This was this like header area was redesigned a bit and rebuilt to give you more context for where you are. And then we also, if you're in a project in the back end, we now have this text dropdown that lets you jump to a specific text in that project. So it's easier to kind of get where you need to go, I hope, with fewer clicks. There's all kinds of like small refactorings throughout Manifold to lists and changes to markup. I won't go into too many details on that stuff, but you'll maybe notice little things are different as you navigate through it. On the front end, we did what we got as far as we could with the resources we had on trying to make Manifold more GDPR friendly. So let me just kind of clear my data so I can show you. Okay. So now Manifold's going to think I'm not logged in. So Manifold's treating me as a user who's come here the first time. So I get this kind of cookie message, and I can accept all of them. I'm an anonymous user right now. I'm going to log in. And once I'm logged in, I have this new privacy page where I can say which cookies I want to accept. If I remember correctly, we set it up so that if internal analytics are enabled, the user will see this bit here. And that, of course, is this stuff that you see in the back end. If you have Google Analytics set up on your instance, which you can do through settings, integration, Google Analytics, then you will see, the user will see like external analytics, or maybe it says Google Analytics, and they'll have to consent to that before we'll send their activity to Google. The user can also see what data Manifold stores about them, and we kind of seed instances with content here that's essentially correct, and try to keep it in simple, plain language rather than legalese. That said, this is something you control, so you can go to Settings, Theme, and then you will see somewhere in here, data use content. And so that language that shows up in different places can be modified to meet the needs of your specific, of your organization. And then we've long had the ability to create a page that has the role of privacy policy. That will get linked to in various places in Manifold if it's present, and you can kind of set up what your privacy policy is that way. We also now have the ability for users to delete their account. That wasn't actually possible really in Manifold v7. Deleting accounts could lead to records missing in association to the user who created them, which caused problems. So we refactored things, and it's now possible to remove an account, and users can remove an account too. And we try to say what will happen here. We had hoped to give users the ability to download their data. That's still on our kind of wish list. We want to have a button in here where a user can like download all their annotations and everything that they created to some extent. We just didn't have the resources to get it done, so it didn't make it into V8. Let's see what else. Another V8 feature: entitlements, and specifically pending entitlements. So our friend Terrence wrote some really nice documentation on this that I was looking at today. You go to Manifold Backend Entitlements. There's a good write-up of what these pending entitlements do, and specifically like why you might use them. I think we built this this feature came out of a situation at Minnesota Press where they had a journal and they needed to essentially be able to upload like a long CSV file of users who could access that journal. Let's say members of some association or society or something. And those users don't have accounts yet on Manifold. So with pending entitlements, if you have something that's access restricted, you can upload a CSV. Manifold will create a pending entitlement for the email address. It'll send the user an email, and Terrence has documented what those emails look like in here under system messaging, saying you've been granted access to this project. And then when the user signs in or when they create an account with that email address, they'll be given access to that project. And those entitlements can expire. There's a mechanism to set the date in the CSV file, so that they like last for a year until the user rejoins whatever association. You could also do this for Classroom. Like if you had a class and you had 30 students and you made a project and you wanted them to have access to it, you could load them. You could bring them in as pending entitlements, and then when those students created accounts, they would just have access to it. It's a better workflow, I think, than having to make accounts for people and set their passwords and then add them. This is a little bit simpler. Okay, so this is a big feature in V8. Let's see. Another thing to kind of touch on real quick are annotations. So let's see. Back home and find my project. Okay. So let's look at our Ray Bradbury book again. Okay, so in Manifold v7, if I annotated, let's say this, when I clicked on this annotation, all I would see is the part that I annotated. And that's not so useful if someone annotates like one word or a fragment of a sentence. So we did a lot of work on how annotations are stored. And when we store them, we now capture some of the context around the annotation, which means that when we display them, we can show them in context of the text. That's really helpful for search results. It's really helpful for as a user when I want to see all my annotations. I'm not just seeing the word Man of Stars. I see the whole thing here. And it's important for placing or figuring out where annotations go when the text changes, as I mentioned earlier. So that was kind of part of that work as well. What else? We added, let's see, I have a link. We made some changes to interactive resources. So this is, let's look at this one. This is when basically something is embedded in Manifold as a resource in an iframe. So this is some, 3D visualization of something. that's hosted elsewhere. It's not in Manifold. It's on another server right here, sketchfab.com. So we had really limited settings around this. You could kind of only display or set the dimensions of it in pixels, which is not really responsive. So we made some changes to that. So you can use pixels, rems, VW or VH units. These are more responsive CSS units of measurement. We also made it possible for these to be full screen, or if they need to use the camera, that can be allowed here. That's something that gets passed into how the iframe is rendered on the page. There were many accessibility fixes in V8. I mean, that's just a constant and ongoing project for us, is, finding or trying to build new features in accessible ways, finding places where there's a defect. I mean, just like there are functional bugs in Manifold and all software, there are accessibility problems that we find. And when we find them, we fix them insofar as we can with the resources that we have. One, I think, important step forward, let's go back to this text, in V8 from an accessibility standpoint is the ability to annotate using only keyboard interactions. I'll show you. So here I'm going to turn on caret browsing. And so with caret browsing, I can move through the text without using my mouse. I can then select some text. I can bring up the annotation menu, do this, save it, and then importantly, get back to where I was in the text. Like, there are numerous challenges here. Browsers don't make it particularly easy to do this. But the hardest part really is trying to keep the state correct for a user who's using keyboard navigation and potentially using a screen reader. So that means, like, when the drawer for the annotation opens, we need to get the focus into that drawer. When it closes, we need to get the focus back into the text. There's focus concerns on this navigation here. And then really importantly, and this maybe was the hardest part, we don't want to lose the user's place when they're moving between the annotation drawer and the text. And this is important not just for creating an annotation with the keyboard, but also reading annotations and then exiting out. And you can see the cursor or the focus is still in the same place. So that was a fair amount of work, and it felt like an important step forward for the Manifold reader. Kind of related, there, like I mentioned, alt text. We also, I can't really easily show you this, but we kind of rethought, how do I put this? We refactored how route changes happen in Manifold. So this is basically like when the URL changes. Manifold is a single page application with a server-side render. So that means that, like, it's not doing a full reload of the browser when I go between routes or URLs. And that can cause problems for a user using a screen reader. So we refactored it so that Manifold is now should be correctly announcing the route changes to the screen reader when the user's going between screens. And I think that's happening consistently, or should be. We also made a number of improvements to title tags, which were not really handled well throughout the front end and back end. That's important for SEO reasons as well. Okay, that went a little longer than I thought. All told, I want to go back to our docs real quick. Oops. I think we mentioned it. Notes V8. Okay. All told, we had 876 commits in Manifold for V7, which was a lot. We're up to almost 6,500, maybe almost 7,000 commits in the repository since we started building this. It's pretty exciting for the team, I think, to have this V8 release, our 8th major release of the platform. And then I guess finally, I'll say, for those of you who have Manifold installed using our packages, We did add support for new versions of Ubuntu. We still want to add support for new versions of Red Hat. CentOS is kind of gone, so we have to figure out what direction we're going to go in there. We did updates to most of we did updates where we could to the underlying um, uh, infrastructure that helps Manifold run, which gets included in that package installer. For those of you who are hosted on MDS, we did a big upgrade to Postgres that had been done in the package installer previously, but now we did it for the MDS clients too, which was rather involved, but you're now all on a more current database. I just want to close out, I guess, by saying like a big, big, big thank you to those of you on this call who are hosting your Manifold instance through Manifold Digital Services. I mean, Manifold is a scrappy small project where we have to make every dollar and every hour of developer time count. And the people in the Manifold community who are paying for their instance through MDS, all of that money is going back into the development and ongoing support and maintenance of Manifold. So those you people are the ones who are keeping it sustainable and keeping it alive. I think it's really important, and we really appreciate you. Okay, that's the end of my spiel, and I will pause here. And I haven't been looking at chat, so if there's any questions, let me know.